All right. This is the intro to obviously the podumentary that we've put together. The first part, no doubt, of a few, probably going into 2026. Now, if you listen to this, I don't know when this will actually be released, but possibly December, maybe, I don't know, or ASAP. Because what the idea behind this podcast was that me and Matt, over the past couple of years anyway, have amalgamated a lot of information that has linked together. And he throws me stuff and I run with it in one direction, and I throw stuff back to him and he runs with it in a different direction. And this is the culmination of that work, I suppose. And the idea behind this podcast was just to press go, press record and see where it went. We knew we were going to get a lot of information, especially with our Chris throwing stuff in as well. And it went great, didn't it, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I liked it. You sent me a copy of it after you recorded it, and I listened back to it, and I liked it. And the whole concept was, when we talked about doing this months and months back, this goes back, what is it today? The 12th of November we're recording this intro. Yeah. But we've been talking about this since before the summer, about doing this.
I reckon
Ashes
before that,
thing.
well before that.
Yeah.
I bet it's going on. It won't be 12 months, but close to 12 months, I reckon, if you look back at the emails.
I didn't realise it was that far back, but I wanted to do an Ashes thing, linking the Ashes, the Elliot family, to the Beatles. There are already connections there between the Beatles and the Ashes that a lot of people know about, but it goes far, far deeper. And I think we've discovered a lot of this that other researchers haven't. So we've been looking into this for a few months, planning this. When we were talking on the phone about recording what you're going to hear in this first installment, a little bit after this intro, the way I wanted it to be recorded was like the way you recorded your Huxley's series, like a conversation. And you said, all right, then that's how we'll do it. We'll just press record and see how it goes. Just have a conversation. Yeah. So that's what we did. We had a conversation. But listening back to it, I loved it. But listening back to that recording of that first installment,
when you press record, there's never any structure to it. That's the problem.
There's never any structure. So it was like spillage of information, all great stuff, but it needs context.
Yeah.
And I think this intro, I need to do it to feel comfortable.
So you can sleep
I
easier.
need to do this so I can, so I don't go slashing my wrist.
Yeah. Also, there's two types of presentation that you can do. You can do opinion-based presentation, which is fair enough. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having an opinion. And there's also research where you're searching out certain truths. Doesn't mean to say them truths mean that person's a bad or a good person. It just means that they're the truths surrounding that person. I.e., Ian Fleming's family owned an international bank, and they were an international banking cartel. That's the truth. You know, it might not be. What we're saying is it's never advertised that that's the truth. When you read about Ian Fleming, they don't tell you they owned a bank that they sold for £7 billion. They never say that.
Yeah. So then you've got to ask yourself, why? Why aren't they telling you that? You know,
and then you link all the intelligence connections to that one person and Masonic links and all these other things.
Yeah.
And you think, well, how can that happen by chance? How does that?
Yeah.
And that's what we're leaving open for people to decide, I suppose, with this research, with Bertrand Russell, for instance, that when you see that Bertrand Russell and his family were the Dukes of Tavistock, and all the land they owned in or around the area where the Tavistock Hospital that you found out, the Tavistock Hospital
The
was
clinic,
built
yeah.
and the clinic and the whole thing. That's got to raise eyebrows, at least in
It
some.
has to, yeah, yeah,
It has to
yeah,
do, hasn't it?
yeah. It has to. It's this area in London called Bloomsbury where, well, you'll hear it in the video, the 2 hours, 45 minutes of it, or whatever it is, however long
Yeah.
it is.
Probably about 5 hours after
You
we finish this intro, this short intro.
5 days. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll find out. Yeah, you'll find out what links Bertrand Russell to Tavistock and all of that, and London, and a particular area of London called Bloomsbury, where a lot of the '60s British counterculture movement was born from, and was when it kicked off, when it
And
became
ironically, it
big.
wasn't born in the 60s, it was born in the
Oh,
50s. Yeah,
yeah,
really. Even before that, even beyond that.
yeah. Sort of the roots were probably even before that, the seeds of it, I should say. But what you were saying before about why hasn't Ian Fleming, why didn't Ian Fleming or anyone connected to his family or his associates ever mention this banking background? You'll find in the video to come and in subsequent episodes, when you look at the links that link the Elliot Asher family to the Beatles, why haven't they ever mentioned any of these links that we're going to mention?
Yes.
Why haven't they? Some of them you could probably say, well, we know why they didn't mention that because it's a little bit dodgy. But there's certain other elements where you think, well, why haven't they ever told us this? Why haven't they said anything? Why haven't they told us about this particular aspect of the Beatles that links to the Asher or the Elliot family or
in the
somebody
story?
else?
It's quite important, isn't it?
It's quite important. You think, and if they've got nothing to hide, why not just say it?
Why not say
haven't
it?
they said anything? Yeah, why have they left it to idiots like us 60 years later to sitting in our little, sad little dens, coming up with it? What, is this what it needs for it to come out? And if so, why? Why won't they tell us? Why didn't they tell us?
Why isn't it important that the Elliots actually had their own lodge?
Yeah.
Why isn't that important to tell people? Among other things, there's about 100 things. I mean, bloody hell, I did with Mike Williams 4 hours at least. I mean, we're probably going to destroy that in 2 bloody episodes.
Oh yeah, easy.
But
yeah,
we've only covered Bertrand Russell in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know when you see the one that we do about the Doors, that you're going to say we need to add that into the mix as well. Because the bloodlines match up with the Elliots and what have you, the counterculture. That even David Crosby's bloodline matches up in Scotland, which a lot of these bloodlines seem to head back to Scotland, don't they, as well?
Yeah, they do. And I'm going to mention that in just a few minutes, actually, as part of my intro to bring a sort.
Oh, we're still on the intro.
Some context. I've actually typed out a kind of improvised script type of thing because I don't want to forget anything. I think this is really important to me to get this information out before we go on to the actual first episode. Okay, so basically, this Asher series that we're about to watch is the first installment, and it's basically a collection of connections that some might put down as merely, quote unquote, coincidence, but others, of course, will say it goes way, 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 way too far and too deep for it to be mere chance. And actually, it's preordained, arranged, you might say. And I certainly feel that way. And do you know what? In all the years I've been researching and putting together articles and podcasts, I don't think I can say that I've ever been this certain that these so-called coincidences that we've got coming up in this first installment and installments to come, I've never been so certain as to say this is nothing, that this is I'm 99.9% sure that this is not coincidence. It can't be. It just can't be. So as I'll mention, you'll see us in the early parts of the first installment talking about a sketch that I've drawn, literally a pencil drawn sketch of a wheel, and the middle part of that wheel is basically the entity that is the Beatles. And by entity, what I mean is what the Beatles were, what they represented. So that could be the songwriting name that is Lennon and McCartney, the Beatles' promotion of LSD, of transcendental meditation, and much, much more. You'll see it. You'll see it in the first installment. These. So you've got in the middle of this wheel, you've got the entity that's the Beatles, and then you've got these spokes coming out, these representations, as I say. These are the spokes of that wheel that essentially created what was and what we regard to be the Beatles, and what helped to make the 60s, the 1960s in the so-called Western world, what it was and how we perceive it today. And a lot of that lives on to this day. We feel the effects of it in our society today. But the thing is, what makes this so potent is the fact that every single one of those spokes, every single one, links to the Asher family, or to be more precise, the maternal side of that family, the Elliots, but it's the same thing really. So every spoke of that wheel that makes the Beatles what they were as an entity, and more importantly, how that entity of the Beatles changed society, every spoke of that wheel, and I mean every spoke of that wheel, connects to the Ashers.
And we're adding more spokes. We're adding more spokes as well. So
all the time. We're learning as we're going along with this series. So just
we sound
a
like
little
AI.
bit of
possibly AI, aren't we?
yeah. Someone's actually said that. Someone actually said I was a bot. Someone
Right.
said to Mark Devlin after I was on one of his shows, he said, "Are you sure that Matt Sergiou isn't a bot?" Because I was just coming out with so much information. That is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Okay, so a little bit of I know this might sound hard to believe, because I know that probably the vast majority of people watching this or listening to this will know who the Ashers are and what their connection is to the Beatles, like the surface level of that. There is, of course, we're going to go deep, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that people aren't aware of. But I think, but just in case there are some people who are not sure of what these specific connections are to the Beatles with regards to the Ashers, so we've got Jane Asher, who is a well-known British TV, movie and stage actress, and she was involved in a long-term relationship with Paul McCartney between 1963 to 1968, and there was even talk that they were going to get married. And between 1963 to 66 or thereabouts, he lived with her at her family home at 57 Wimpole Street in London. And that's important. We've got to make note of that, because that is something that's going to be talked about in later episodes. And he lived there with Jane, and also her brother, musician Peter Asher, their dad, Richard Asher, Dr. Richard Asher, and mum, Margaret, whose maiden name was Elliot. And of course, Dr. Richard died in suspicious circumstances in 1969, and we'll be talking about that in future episodes. Now, of course, as many people watching this, listening to this will know, the most commonly known of the coincidences linking the Ashers to the Beatles is George Martin, the Beatles record producer, the man who produced their hit songs and who's been dubbed the fifth Beatle. I think that's important
quite a few of them
as well.
Yeah, about 10 fifth Beatles.
Yeah, exactly. But the reason I mention this is that Paul McCartney, when George Martin died a few years ago, Paul McCartney put up on a Twitter post, he said, if anyone was the fifth Beatle, it was George Martin. So coming from him,
yeah, you would say
yeah. So now here's the coincidence, quote unquote coincidence. Here's one of them. This is the most well-known one, but I'm just putting it out there just in case there's anyone listening to this who's not aware of it. Now, some 15 years or so before he met the Beatles and became their producer, he just so happened to have been having private oboe lessons from none other than Margaret Asher. So 15 years before George Martin met the Beatles, 15 years before one of those Beatles went on to be romantically involved with Margaret Asher's daughter, Jane, George Martin was getting oboe lessons from Margaret. Fancy that.
I mean, when you read that, I mean, that alone should ring alarm bells.
Yeah.
Because the the law of averages says that just can't happen. It might happen in he teaches oboe, then bumps into Paul McCartney and John Lennon, but not becomes integral in their life.
Goes on to date the daughter of the mother of the teacher, and it's London as well. So how many music teachers would there have been in London? I don't know. Maybe there weren't so many oboe teachers in.
I can't see that. Yeah, I would have thought there'd been a few floating about. But anyway, that alone should set alarm bells. But that is out there. That's quite a well-known
that's
one,
out there. Yeah. So as I said before, most people who look into this, who are interested in this subject, will know this already. But I'm just putting it out there just in case there are some people listening to this who are thinking, what's the point of this series, this gargantuan series these guys are doing? So that's, I'm just putting it out there for context so people can get an idea of why we're doing this. But it's also, again, we'll be going into great detail about this in future episodes, I think, I would dare to say. But I think it's also important, for the sake of context now in this intro, to mention Margaret's side of the family, the maternal side of the Asher family, the Elliots, because they're not your run-of-the-mill family. So essentially, from what I've been able to decipher... I
actually think, Matt, just to stop you a second, I actually think this is what got me looking at the Ashers, because when I was doing the Huxley's The Brave New World Order series, which this is sort of a spin-off from the Huxley Brave New World Order.
It is.
It has to be included in that world for me, from a sheep farm perspective, because Huxley's obviously on one of the Beatles album cover, Sgt. Pepper, A Lonely Heart.
Yeah.
Lonely Hearts. And I thought, I'll look into all the people that are on that. That terrified me, because I thought, I'm mad enough without looking into about, I don't know how many people are on that.
I can't remember now, 50 or something
50
maybe.
Odd, yeah. I thought that will take me all my life to do. So then you said, have you ever looked at Jane Asher's genealogy? You actually said that to me. I think. I
can't remember that.
Last December, or you sent me over that she'd done an interview and she was related to King Richard.
Oh, yeah.
That is what got me on looking at Jane Asher. And then and the Elliot family.
Yeah. And
it's your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault. I don't mind. It keeps you off the streets.
I've only found something else.
Exactly, keeps you off the streets, mate. So yeah, essentially, I'm not going to go into the full family tree. I'm going to explain a little. I'm going to sort of give you a brief sketch of it, but I'm not going to go into full detail.
We can't match the intro.
We can't. This is for future episodes. And I know this is your particular side of speciality that you're going to want to dive deep into as well.
We're both into this, yeah.
I suppose, but this is more your thing, sort of family trees and stuff.
If I send you over what I've done, like we did with the Boyds, you'll probably run off in another direction with some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Which is worrying in its own right, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I'll get onto them in a minute actually as well. The Boys, got to mention them because they do connect. So basically, from what I've been able to decipher with regards to the Eliots, and this is actually according to the Eliots themselves over the generations in books that they've researched and written about their own family line. So this is a lot of this information I picked out is according to them. Okay, the Elliot bloodline. Okay, the one that we're most interested in, and that we're going to be focusing in on mostly, I think, is the British bloodline. That's the one I've been focusing on anyway. So basically what happens, what we're told is it goes back to 1066, the Norman invasion of England by William the Conqueror. And accompanying him on that invasion was one of his knights, who was Sir William de Eliot. So that's Aliot. And his descendants initially settled in Devon, where they flourished for about 8 or 10 generations, from what I can make out. And then they moved to Cornwall, where they then established themselves and where they still basically are, where the main family seat is, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And Peter and Jane Asher's mum, Margaret Elliot, derives from this particular family line. So,
and it's an important line as well. It's not
hugely, and I'll get to that in a moment, because this is not some run-of-the-mill family. But as well as the English Elliots, you kind of touched on it earlier, as well as the ones that have settled in Cornwall, there's the Scottish Eliots. Now, some say that the Scottish Eliots are unrelated. They've said that that they're unrelated to the English line, that they're actually the Eliots in Scotland are actually named after a village that's there. However, other sources say no. The Scottish Eliots and the English Eliots are actually blood related, with their roots going back to that knight, Sir William de Eliot, who came over with William the Conqueror. And this is actually according to some of the Eliots that have looked into their own bloodline in various books that you can find online. You can find these free online. You can read them for yourself. So even their family, the Eliots in England, have said, no, the Scottish line is connected. So here we go then. Not your run-of-the-mill family by any shot at all, however far you throw the ball. So, quick rundown of the Cornwall Eliot line, the direct descendants of Jane and Peter Asher. So, the Cornwall Eliot line, from what I can make out, it began in 1620 with John Eliot of Port Eliot in St. Germans in Cornwall. Now, Port Eliot was a priory that the Eliots purchased in St. Germans, and they named it Port Eliot. So they bought it and gave it that name. John Eliot was born in 1590. He was educated at Oxford, surprise, surprise, knighted in 1618, and he was a member of Parliament in Britain. So he was an MP, a British politician. More MPs followed in subsequent generations of the Eliots, and eventually the Eliots of Cornwall were made into earls and barons as well. There were also Eliots in the line between the 17 and 1800s who worked closely within British government as well as being members of Parliament.
You tend to find in that era, them eras that you've spoke about, from 1066 up to that
1800s, yeah.
That if they had 3 or 4 boys, one would be the in-line to inherit the earldom or the dukedom. The other one would go into politics. One might go into the military or go into religion. So what they're doing is they're covering all the control bases.
Or one might even become a philosopher, quote unquote philosopher, or an professor, intellectual, or an artist or something like that. But just one example of there's Edward Granville Elliot, Earl of St. Germans, born in 1798. So he was a former MP. He was also, here we go, a Lord of the Treasury, Ambassador to Spain, Postmaster General, Chief Secretary for Ireland, and Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. So quite a resume. And then there was Edward James Eliot, and he married the daughter of William Pitt, the British Prime Minister, between 1766 and 1768. So, yeah.
And William Pitt owned Chatham House, I think I remember.
Was it Chatham House?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. It just never stops, does it?
No,
Bloody never stops. And I think this is a good point here to mention another lady who was romantically involved with a Beatle during the 60s and who features in this wheel that we're going to see, this sketch, this wheel. And she comes under the subheading of meditation. So where you see the spoke in my sketch where it says meditation.
You need some colouring pens as well.
Yeah. I actually had a question mark next to hers. All the spokes coming out of the wheel, I had an answer for. I sort of wrote in pencil, yeah, that's the Ashers. Yeah, they've got a hand in that. Yes, this spoke here. Yeah, they've got a hand in that. When it came to meditation, I had a question mark, but I've since been able to answer that. And so basically, we've got to mention this other lady that's involved. So we've got Jane Asher, who was going out with a Beatle in the 60s. So she's Asher Elliot bloodline. But there's also another lady at the time in the 60s who not only dated a Beatle, she married a Beatle, and that's Pattie Boyd. She married George Harrison in 1966. Why mention Pattie? Well, you'll find out later in this installment, in this first installment. But just to give you a taster, according to the Scots Peerage, a book that looks at the old so-called elite bloodlines, the Boyd bloodline that Pattie is related to is part Irish and, here we go, Scottish. Now, to be more precise, it's part of the Earl of Kilmarnock bloodline in Scotland. That's the Boyd bloodline that she belongs to. According to Scots Peerage, the first in that so-called elite line was Robert Boyd, who fought for Robert the Bruce loyally for Robert the Bruce, the King of the Scots. He fought alongside him in the Scottish War for Independence against England. He also is said to have fought for Sir William Wallace for Scottish independence as well. And it's said that as a reward for his loyalty and service to that cause, he was knighted and became Sir Robert Boyd. I think this was sometime in the early 1300s or something. And later generations of the Boyds were made lords and earls, especially of Kilmarnock in Scotland. Yeah. Another name we'll be mentioning is T.S. Eliot, the American-born poet, because according to none other than Jane Asher herself, she's actually said that T.S. Eliot was related to her mum, Margaret. Now, you said that Margaret Eliot and T.S. Eliot were cousins?
Yes, cousins, yes.
Well, they're cousins, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. And he was also a friend of British so-called philosopher Bertrand Russell, who's the key figure in this first installment to come. So you've got T.S. Eliot.
I think T.S. Eliot actually lived with Bertrand Russell.
He did. He did. Yeah, they lived together in Bloomsbury in London, giving the game away a little bit. No. I'm going to. It's all going to come out. They in Bloomsbury in London. I think. Well, we talk about it in the first installment later on. You'll hear us talking about it. I think Bertrand Russell. It said that when he was a lecturer, I think it was at Harvard in the early part of the 20th century, he taught T.S. Eliot and they became friends. And then when T.S. Eliot came over to England, he actually lived in Bertrand Russell's apartment in Bloomsbury in London, which is called Russell Chambers. I think that was the name of the building.
It would be impossible that the Dukes of Bedford, the Dukes of Tavistock, the Russells would not know the Earls of Saint-Germain or Saint-Germain.
Yeah.
That is impossible.
And they were both supporters of eugenics as well.
Yes.
T.S. Eliot and Bertrand Russell. But here's the thing: this is the reason why we're mentioning Bertrand Russell in this first instalment, because certainly from my research, having looked into the British counterculture scene over the last, I've been looking at it for the last 10 years or so. Bertrand Russell, I can pretty much say, I'm pretty much 99.9% certain that he was regarded as and is regarded as a forefather of the 1960s British counterculture, even though at the time in the 1960s, he was in his late 80s, I think he was well into his 90s by that point.
I mean, I would say he's just as important as Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, even more so, maybe, even more so. I would call him the grandfather, actually, of the 1960s British counterculture. I don't know about stateside. And of course, the Beatles were the champions. They were the promoters of the counterculture.
That's without doubt now, isn't it?
That's without doubt. They said it themselves at the time. They championed everything that came out of the counterculture, whatever it was, whether it was drugs or, flower power, as it was called, or the music. The Beatles were waving the flag for it.
And the Beatles really now are becoming peripheral because, I know it sounds a bit mad, because the Ashes, really, their story, their connections are actually bigger than the individuals inside the band.
Yeah. So they were kind of the band, or what became the entity, the Beatles, were the brand, the vehicle. The vehicle in which to move ahead this agenda, this social agenda. If you think that Bertrand Russell, as I say, was like this forefather of the British counterculture movement, so in the same breath, when you think, you've also got Peter Asher, Jane Asher's brother. So we're talking here about, because they're related, the Russells and the Ashers are related.
And that's another one of those coincidences, just like Peter Asher, just like Peregrine Elliot, all of these people, is it Peregrine Elliot or Rand Salty?
Peregrine,
all of these people are around the Ashers, are all related. That was one of the whacks around the face with a wet fish for me and you, that moment, where we realised that all of these people aren't just there; they're all related.
Yeah, and so you've got Peter Asher, who
they're all cousins. and brothers.
Yeah. The point is that Peter Asher, Jane Asher's brother, he was also a champion of the counterculture, same as Bertrand Russell. Whereas Bertrand Russell wasn't so direct with it, Peter Asher was, because he invested in a bookshop and a gallery, which became the kind of the epicenter, if you like, of the burgeoning British counterculture scene in London. And yeah, as I said a moment or two ago, the Eliots and the Ashers and Bertrand Russell are actually bloodline connected. And I drew you a sketch ages and ages ago, because sometimes when you're looking at genealogy, you'll know this, Dom. When you're putting together the genealogy of someone that you're trying to trace their genealogy, and you're doing it online, and you find something, and you think it's difficult to keep abreast of it, because you find something on a website, on a page, and it says so and so, that's his brother-in-law, and that was his wife, da 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 da. And then you press a link and it takes you to another page. You think, wait a minute, but I can't remember what the other page said. So you find yourself having to write it down on a piece of paper, because otherwise you'll forget it all. Because in your head, all you've got in your head is brother-in-law, sister-in-law, grandmother, grandfather, and you're trying to remember it all. But it's not in front of you on the computer.
Do you know what?
So many links, it's disappeared.
I don't know if you get this, but that is one of the things that I can sort of envision where it's going. I remember, so when I come across...
I can't do it in my head. I have to write it down. I have to write it down to remember. When I come across
names, I do it in a way that I use the male line first, although the female line's generally the most important one. I use the male line first and go to the end of the male line, then come back to the first female and go forward. And then that way, I learned over time, because I ended up doing what you were on about there, that you end up losing where you were.
Yeah, you do. You do.
And you've got to go back but yeah, anyway.
So basically what I've done I wanted to link, I found a link that links the Elliots / Ashers to Bertrand Russell.
And then I found one exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. You found
times.
one as well at different times, and it's basically the same. We found the same thing by doing it separately without knowing that either of us was doing it. But I had to sketch it out on 2 bits of A4, and I had to sellotape the middle because it was so gargantuan. And I've sent it to you, and hopefully we can put that up on the screen now.
Yeah, hopefully we can.
So people can see it, because I actually mention it in the installment that's to come. There's a point where you say to me, or I say to you, oh yeah, because the Ashers and the Elliots are related to the Russells. And I say to you, oh yeah, I've got it somewhere here, but I can't find it at the minute. And I never did find it. So what I've done here is I've actually typed it out so I can read it to you. So, okay. And hopefully we'll get a shot of my sketch of the line, because it's huge. It is quite octopus-like.
Yeah.
So this connection, connecting the Elliot bloodline to Bertrand Russell. Right, I rooted it to Henry Augustus Dillon Lee, 13th Viscount Dillon of Costello Gallin, and I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yes.
So here we go. One of his daughters, Henrietta Dillon Lee, married Edward John Stanley, 3rd Baron Stanley of Alderley, and one of their daughters, Catherine Louisa, married John Russell, Viscount Amberley, and they had 2 sons, one of whom was Bertrand Russell. Meanwhile, and you'll hear me mention this later on in the video. Meanwhile, a sister of that earlier mentioned Henrietta Maria Dillon Lee, a sister of hers, Louisa Ann Rose Dillon, married the Right Honourable Sir Spencer Cecil Brabazon Ponsonby Fane, and one of their daughters, Constance Louisa, married William Robert Phillips, Phelips, whose daughter, Claire Louisa, married Edward Granville Elliot, who were the parents of Margaret Elliot, later to become Margaret Asher, Peter and Jane's mum. So that's how Bertrand Russell, grandfather of the 1960s British counterculture, is related by bloodline to the Ashers. And as I say, I mentioned this part of the family tree in the first instalment to come. Incidentally, and this is worth mentioning too, Patty Boyd, who became Patty Harrison, is related to Bertrand Russell and the Elliots through somebody called Lady Isabel Boyd. Lady Isabel Boyd, and I've got graphics for this. We can put this up as well. Lady Isabel Boyd was born sometime between 1600 and 1628. No one's actually absolutely sure. And she was the daughter of Robert Boyd of Kilmarnock. So here we've got this Kilmarnock
That's
thing
where
coming up
the
again.
aristocratic Kilmarnock line is.
Yeah. So Lady Isabel Boyd's daughter Marion married Sir Archibald Coburn of Langton, 4th Baronet. Their daughter, Helen Jean Coburn, married Sir Robert Stewart of Allenbank, 1st Baronet, and that's Stewart spelled Steuart. Some spellings come up in that style, others don't.
No, others come with a W. Yeah,
others come with a W. So their daughter, so as I say, their daughter Helen. So Helen Jean Coburn married Sir Robert Stewart of Allenbank, 1st Baronet. Helen Jean and Sir Robert's daughter, who was also named Helen, married Sir Gilbert Elliot, 2nd Baronet Minto. So this is an Eliot from the Scottish line, which we're told is related to the English Eliots, although some say it isn't, others say they are. The 2nd Baronet of Minto and Helen, one of their sons, who went on to become Sir Gilbert Elliot, 3rd Baronet of Minto, married Agnes Dalrymple Kinnenmound, and they had a son, Gilbert Elliot, 1st Earl of Minto. So there's the Boyd-Elliot link. Okay, so we now have a link linking Patty Boyd and Jane Asher. Now, how Bertrand Russell links to this, Gilbert Elliot, 1st Earl of Minto, who is Lady Isabel Boyd's great-great-great-grandson, his son, the 2nd Earl of Minto, born in November 1782, went on to have a daughter, Frances Anna Maria Elliot Murray Kinnenmound. She married John Russell, 1st Earl Russell. Their son, John Russell, Viscount Amberley, went on to have 2 sons, one of whom was Bertrand Russell. So Bertrand Russell is related to the Boyds. And Lady Isabel Boyd, from what I can make out, is Bertrand Russell's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. So Patty Boyd. So basically, after coming out with all of that at you, in summary, Patty Boyd, who married George Harrison, and Jane Asher, who was Paul McCartney's serious long-term girlfriend, and Bertrand Russell are all related to each other.
And that about sums it up, doesn't it?
That about sums it up.
Because well, before we finish on this, are we done there with your notes, or
pretty much? Yeah. I sent you another picture of an old newspaper headline, or a newspaper article. It's called "Priests and Prophets of Permissiveness."
We'll stick that up now when
I'll stick that up now. So basically,
the intro won't be in as much depth as the documentary, but the stuff that Matt's talking about will stick up there on the screen as you're watching it.
Yeah. So basically, what we've got. Hopefully what you've put up is a piece which is actually taken from the Guardian newspaper from October 1967, and the title reads "Priests and Prophets of Permissiveness." So I've been saying that Bertrand Russell, according to my findings, is deemed to be a forefather of the British counterculture movement scene, and this newspaper article pretty much kind of confirms that in a way. So as you can see from the newspaper headline, Russell is deemed to be a priest and a prophet of the so-called permissive society of 60s Western culture. So the permissive society, so what we're talking about here back in the 60s was the loosening attitude towards sexual behavior, family values, childbirth, marriage, drug use, and so on. And if you look at this newspaper piece from The Guardian, so you've got Bertrand Russell, who is deemed to be a priest and prophet of permissiveness, his name sitting alongside Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and also a guy by the name of John Hopkins, who was John Hoppy Hopkins, who's someone I've looked into in great depth. And he was essentially, and is essentially regarded as the de facto leader of the British counterculture movement. He was the man, whenever something happened within the British counterculture scene, let's say, for example, a nightclub event, or a new kind of collective that was pushing the 60s counterculture movement. He was the man that was effectively making it happen. He was the go-getter. He was the doer, basically. And if you ask anyone who was involved, any key mover and shaker from the 60s counterculture scene, one of the key people, they will all say to you effectively that he was the key mover and shaker. So John Hopkins, the Beatles, Allen Ginsberg, Bob Dylan, they're all in this Guardian article, and many other names as well. And there, slap bang right next to them, is Bertrand Russell. So that's the regard he was given. Even back in the 1960s, as this was going on, this was the regard that Bertrand Russell was given. His importance in the whole 60s movement, in Britain. Yeah.
And I think we'll see that when you listen to that, or when people listen to that audio clip that's going to be played in a little bit. The guy asking him the question is really sounding subservient to him and in awe of what Bertrand Russell is about to answer to his question. Yeah, we were a good find, that, Matt.
Thanks. Yeah, I love it when I find things like that. That's what gives me a buzz. Gives me a
So the jigsaw puzzle together.
Indeed. So yeah, you were saying earlier about Bertrand Russell. He gave T.S. Eliot, his friend, a flat in London to stay at. I don't know if they shared the flat together or whether he lent it to him or sublet it to him. I'm not exactly sure, but this was an area in London called Bloomsbury, which we'll also mention in the first instalment. And I think it's also worth mentioning that, and I've been there. I've actually made a video about all of this, and you can find it on my YouTube page, Conspiro TV, about this area in London. And I've actually been down there and done a kind of kind of like in your face on the street, hot footing it with a video phone camera report on the whole thing. And I've hot footed it down there. Literally, the flat where Bertrand Russell and T.S. Eliot were staying is effectively about 10 or 15-minute walk away from the Indica bookshop. So some 60 or so or 70 or so years after T.S. Eliot and Bertrand Russell were living in this flat, so some 60 or 70 or so years before these two relatives of the Elliot Asher family were staying in this flat, and Bertrand Russell, of course, being this forefather of the British counterculture movement, some 10 or so minutes walk away, some 60 or 70 years later, there was this Indica bookshop, which was partly owned by Peter Asher, their relative. And the Indica bookshop was certainly a catalyst ground for the burgeoning 60s counterculture scene of London. It's where they all met. It's where all the key movers and shakers, like this John Hopkins guy I mentioned, he would have been hanging around there. The Beatles were hanging around there. In fact, Paul McCartney gave money to make this shop come into fruition, to make it happen. And accordingly, the payback was Paul McCartney and the rest of the Beatles were fed a lot of this countercultural knowledge that they then transmitted through the Beatles and to the rest of wider society. And it helped, I would suggest, it helped to shape the culture of the 60s, and we're still living in that today. So this was a shop that championed the counterculture scene, and in tandem with that, it was a champion of the avant-garde as well. So it sold avant-garde books and records, and it also sold books on the occult. It sold books on Crowley and so on, and other books as well, such as The Psychedelic Experience by Timothy Leary. And yeah, John Lennon, on a visit to the shop, he was given a copy of The Psychedelic Experience, and that inspired him to record the song Tomorrow Never Knows, which appeared on their 1966 album Revolver, which you could argue was one of the first, if not the very first, LSD pop song on record. And the Indica Art Gallery, which is somewhere in another location, again partly owned by Peter Asher, is where John Lennon was introduced to Yoko Ono, who was also into the avant-garde. That's how she started her career. She was an avant-garde artist. So he was introduced to her, and that set him off on that avant-garde path, if you like. So again, the Indica was there influencing the Beatles artistic direction, if you like. And it was also the Indica bookshop in Bloomsbury, if I'm not mistaken, was also in the basement. It was where the very first British underground newspaper, the International Times, the IT, that's where it started its life, in the basement, I think in the end of 1966. And that was started again by John Hopkins, John Hoppy Hopkins, this guy who I mentioned earlier. So, yeah. So there you go. That's pretty much everything I've got to say.
I think this is actually an introduction episode of its own.
It is, and I feared that it might be. So,
well, I didn't fear. I realised what was going to happen, but I think it'd be a good. I think it'd be a good introduction episode, as in release this one first.
Okay,
get a taster to what we're going to do.
Yeah,
and then I can. We'll just, before we go, we'll just talk about the. I will play the audio after we've spoken about it in this episode, right?
Yeah.
In the introduction episode, but I will also play it right at the beginning again, for people to hear at the start of the episode we're talking about, that you're going to hear. I'm going to release them on the same day, to be honest with you. We should do, just release them both on the same day.
A video bomb.
A video bomb.
Video bomb. Do you want to mention William Sargant as well quickly?
Do you know that's one of the most exciting episodes I think we're going to do at some point, is the MK Ultra stuff. Sargant, Humphrey Osborne, were it? Osmond?
Humphrey Osmond, yeah.
Yeah. And all the other people, even the Lieutenant Olson, who was, I found, I don't know if you knew this, but I found that he was sequestered, is it seconded or whatever? Seconded? That's seconded. Whatever, them two words, to William Sargant.
I never knew that until this year, when I read the book. I can't remember the name of the book. It's by John Stott.
Yeah. I mean, that part alone, I mean, again, they talk about coincidences. It just can't be coincidences. Anyway.
Yeah, just to mention, but basically that William Sargant basically was a psychiatrist, a British psychiatrist, and during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, he was effectively made head of a part of he was a ward in a hospital or a department in St. Thomas's Hospital. Hospitals.
Yeah.
But his main place, his main HQ, if you like, was he also worked in Harley Street, but he had this St. Thomas's Hospital in London. Was where he was a head of a department as a psychiatrist, a mental ward, as you would have called it back in those days. I think it was Ward 5 was where he did most of his work. But basically, the mind-blowing aspect of this for me is the fact that he was given carte blanche to wipe the memories of mentally ill patient, of anybody who came into that hospital in that particular part of the hospital that he was in charge of. So through a mixture of ECT, a cocktail of drugs, and hours of sleep, quote unquote, therapy, he effectively wiped the memories of dozens of patients. And this was, and what freaks me out is this was happening in a national health hospital.
Yeah,
this wasn't a private hospital. This was a state-funded British hospital.
Yeah, and it was happening in several different hospitals in or around London, weren't it?
Yeah.
Well, you can only guess even more hospitals, because a lot of these people who were trainees under Sargant scuttled off in their own little directions to other mental health hospitals.
And St. Thomas's was the main one. Was the one that we're most aware of. But where's that one that celebrities go to? He worked there. The Priory. He was working there in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. Again, I think.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, all these stars are coming in. Alcoholics, addicted to drugs, depressed. Why wouldn't you have a MK Ultra expert doctor there just to reprogram Mick Jagger as he comes in, or Keith Richards?
Or Marianne
I'm not saying he did. I'm not saying he did. I'm just using that as an example.
Well, Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, stayed at the Priory shortly before he died.
Right. So, sounds like Jack Ruby. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
But yeah, so explain the video, the 2 minute or whatever it is recording of Bertrand Russell. It gets asked a question, doesn't it? It's about the Pugwash conferences were about getting rid of nuclear weapons. Yes, it weren't about a cartoon on BBC in the 70s. It was about the
what's it, a conference?
Nuclear disarmament using all the academics of the time, Einstein, etc. And Bertrand Russell was one of the heads of this Pugwash Conference, held in Pugwash, Canada. The initial one, hence why it's called Pugwash. But so a guy asked him a question. Basically,
it was a press conference or something, wasn't it?
The culmination of the question was, even if we get rid of nuclear weapons, we need a one world government or something like that.
Yeah. And he agreed.
He agreed, and actually talked about it further on in his conversation.
Yeah.
And he was a pusher of a one world government as well, weren't he?
Yeah, we'll go into that in the first instalment quite a bit, won't we? Yeah, yeah. He was well into all of that. There's so many speeches I've read of his, where he effectively keeps, well, not effectively, he just in your face is saying what we need is a one world government, an international organization. He used different names.
Spectre.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, I've tried to improve the sound because obviously it's 1950s or whatever it was. I think it was 1956 or 7, or it might be even earlier. The first Pugwash Conference was. And
I can't remember now.
So the guy asking the question, it was pretty low, so I've cut it and increased the volume a little bit. But
when did Einstein die? Because he was part of the Pugwash. Because was it Bertrand Russell and Einstein?
Russell,
yeah,
manifesto.
They wrote the manifesto. The year, I think the year that the Pugwash Conference started is the year that Einstein actually died.
Okay.
So it's that year. So, but I don't know what year that was.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So there you go. So that's the intro, and only an hour and a quarter or something like that, I think. It's now quarter to 12. It's now quarter to 12. So anybody thinking, how do I do this research? It's quarter to 12.
Yeah, and I'm going to go off and do some more now.
Yeah, well, I've been at it all day writing. Well, most of the day writing my book. Yeah. All right, then we'll leave it there. You might need to rewind and replay this audio, just because the words don't necessarily jump out because it's an old recording going on bloody 80, 90 years old. So
it's a bit choppy.
Yeah. Okay. Enjoy the recording, and I hope you enjoy the first instalment. Let us know what you think.
Lord Russell, yes. You say that imperative almost that politics be kept out of this. But is there not a political question that is bound to arise in the minds of the statesmen? Are they not bound to ask, can you envisage a scheme of disarmament and the wiping out of nuclear weapons which would not deliver the free world into the hands of communists, as long as men can still fight with sticks and stones, people would say? Isn't the only answer world government?
Well, I'm entirely in agreement with you. I don't think prohibiting nuclear weapons in itself is the slightest good. You could prohibit them and have a universal agreement to prohibit them, and they would still be used if ever there was a war. And I don't think there's any point whatever in mere prohibition. The only thing that is any use at all is not to have a war. And as I said, suggested at the tail end of what I was saying, we can avoid war by expedience for the moment, but ultimately we must have some international authority which is able to prevent war. That is the ultimate goal, but it takes some time to reach that goal, I think. But I do say most emphatically that merely to prohibit nuclear weapons won't get you anywhere at all.